Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I never thought I'd become the kind of person who gets into fights with homeowners associations, but here we are. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when I decided to finally pull the trigger on something I'd been thinking about for years, going completely off-grid with solar power. Let me back up a bit to give you the full picture. I live in an old farmhouse that my grandfather built back in 1974. It sits on 3 acres of what used to be agricultural land, and for most of my childhood we were surrounded by fields and maybe 1 or 2 other houses scattered around. The property has been in my family ever since, and I inherited it when my grandfather passed away 5 years ago. About 10 years ago, everything changed. A big development company bought up all the land around us and built this massive luxury subdivision. They called it something fancy, but everyone just refers to it as the new development. These weren't your average starter homes either. We're talking about huge houses, all looking basically identical, with perfectly manicured lawns and those ridiculous decorative mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. The weird thing is, my property ended up completely surrounded by this development on 3 sides. The only way in or out is through my old gravel driveway that connects to the main road. It's like I'm living on an island in the middle of their perfect suburban paradise. The development company actually tried to buy me out twice, but I told them I wasn't interested. This land has been in my family for decades, and I wasn't about to sell it to some corporation so they could tear down my grandfather's house and put up another cookie-cutter mansion. Anyway, fast forward to earlier this year, I'd been getting more and more fed up with the electric company and their constantly rising rates. Plus, with all the talk about being more environmentally friendly, I started looking into solar power. After doing a bunch of research and getting quotes from several companies, I decided to go all in. Not just a few panels on the roof, but a serious ground-mounted solar array that could handle all my electricity needs and then some. The installation took about 2 weeks. The crew had to bring in some heavy equipment to set up the mounting system, but they were professional about it and cleaned up after themselves. When it was all done, I had this beautiful array of panels in my side yard, along with a state-of-the-art battery system that could store enough power to keep me running for days even if the sun wasn't shining. I was pretty proud of the whole setup. It wasn't cheap, but between the federal tax credits and the money I'd save on electricity over the next 20 years, it was going to pay for itself. Plus, there's something satisfying about being completely energy independent. No more worrying about power outages or rate hikes. For the first week after installation, everything was perfect. The system was generating more power than I could use, and the battery was staying fully charged. I was already planning to add a few more panels if I decided to get an electric vehicle down the road. Then, I got the letter. It came via certified mail, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be good news. The return address said it was from the HOA board of the development next door. I almost didn't sign for it because I figured it was probably some kind of solicitation or maybe an invitation to one of their community events that I had no interest in attending. When I finally opened it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a formal notice of violation, claiming that my solar panels violated some bylaw about prohibited external structures. According to this letter, I had 48 hours to remove the panels or face a fine of $500 per day until they were gone. My first reaction was to laugh. I mean, the whole thing was obviously some kind of mistake. I'm not part of their HOA. I never signed any agreements with them. My property predates their entire development by decades. Clearly, someone in their office had gotten their wires crossed and sent this notice to the wrong address. I figured the best thing to do was just ignore it. They'd realize their mistake eventually, and that would be the end of it. I had better things to do than waste time calling some HOA office to explain something that should have been obvious to anyone who bothered to check their records. That was my first mistake. 3 days later, I was out in my garage working on my truck when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out and saw this middle-aged woman in a business suit getting out of a white sedan, carrying a clipboard and looking like she owned the place. Behind her was this guy in what was obviously a cheap security guard uniform, complete with a badge and everything. The woman marched right up to my front door and started pounding on it like she was trying to break it down. When I opened it, she immediately launched into this tirade about how I was violating community standards and destroying property values for all the real homeowners in the neighborhood. I tried to explain that there had obviously been some kind of mix-up, but she cut me off before I could get 2 words out. She told me her name and that she was the HOA president, and she didn't want to hear any excuses. According to her, this was a prestigious community with high standards, and my solar panels were an eyesore that violated multiple bylaws. She said if I didn't remove them immediately, they would place a lien on my house and have them removed at my expense. The security guard just stood there the whole time, trying to look intimidating. I almost felt bad for the guy. He was probably getting paid minimum wage to stand around while this woman screamed at strangers about solar panels. I tried again to explain that I wasn't part of their HOA, but she wasn't having it. She said everyone in the area was subject to their rules and regulations, and ignorance wasn't an excuse. She gave me another 48 hours to comply and then stormed off with her security guard in tow. After they left, I was pretty annoyed. This woman had come onto my property and basically threatened me over something that was none of her business. But I still figured this would blow over once someone with half a brain looked at the situation and realized I wasn't actually part of their community. Wrong again. A week later, I got another certified letter. This one was even more official looking, with legal language and everything. They were calling it a final demand and claiming I now owed $3,500 in accumulated fines. They were also threatening to send a contractor to forcibly remove my illegal equipment and bill me for the costs. That's when I started to get really irritated. These people weren't just making an innocent mistake anymore. They were actively harassing me and threatening my property. I started thinking about calling a lawyer, but I wanted to see how far they were willing to take this before I escalated things. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days after getting that second letter, I was sitting in my kitchen having lunch when I looked out the window and saw the HOA president walking around my property, taking pictures of the solar panels with her phone. She had another person with her who looked like he might be a lawyer based on his expensive suit and the way he was pointing at things and taking notes. They were clearly trespassing, but I decided to just watch and see what they were up to. The woman was talking on her phone while she walked around, probably describing the solar installation to whoever was on the other end. Every few minutes, she'd stop and take more pictures from different angles. After about 20 minutes, they got back in their car and left. That's when I realized these people weren't going to give up easily. They were serious about this, which meant I needed to get serious too. I spent the rest of that afternoon digging through all my property documents. I pulled out the original deed from when my grandfather bought the land, the survey maps from when the house was built, and all the paperwork I'd inherited when he passed away. I also did some research on the development next door and found copies of their CC and Rs and HOA bylaws online. What I discovered was exactly what I'd suspected all along. My property was completely separate from their development. It was unincorporated county land that had never been part of any homeowners association. The development company had built around me, but they had no legal authority over my land whatsoever. But instead of just calling the HOA president and explaining this over the phone, I decided to have a little fun with the situation. These people had been harassing me for weeks, threatening my property, and trespassing on my land. They deserved to sweat a little bit. I called the HOA office and told them I wanted to schedule a compliance meeting to discuss the solar panel situation. I said I had all the necessary documents ready and we could resolve everything in person. The secretary I talked to sounded relieved and said the board would be happy to meet with me to work out a payment plan for the fines and discuss removal of the panels. We scheduled the meeting for the following Saturday at 10 a.m. at my house. I told them to bring whoever they needed to bring to make this official. When Saturday came around, I was ready. I had all my documents organized in a folder, and I'd even made copies for them to keep. I also had my phone ready to record the whole thing, just in case things got interesting. Right at 10 o'clock, 3 cars pulled into my driveway. Out came the HOA president, 2 other board members, and the lawyer I'd seen trespassing on my property earlier in the week. They all looked pretty smug and confident, like they were coming to collect a debt from someone who'd finally given up fighting. I invited them into my kitchen and offered everyone coffee, which they declined. The HOA president took charge of the meeting right away, pulling out her own folder of documents and starting to lecture me about community standards and property values. She spent about 5 minutes explaining how solar panels were considered unsightly external structures that violated multiple sections of their bylaws. She showed me pictures they'd taken of my installation and pointed out how it was visible from several houses in the development. According to her, the other residents were complaining constantly about having to look at my industrial equipment every time they went for a walk or worked in their gardens. The lawyer chimed in with some technical language about CC and Rs and enforcement mechanisms. He explained how homeowners associations have broad authority to regulate external modifications and maintain aesthetic standards. He also mentioned that the accumulated fines were now approaching $5,000 and would continue growing until I came into compliance. One of the other board members pulled out what looked like a contract for a removal service. She explained that they'd already gotten quotes from 3 different contractors who could dismantle the solar array and haul it away. The cost would be around $8,000, which would be added to my fine total if I didn't handle the removal myself within the next 48 hours. Through all of this, I just sat there nodding and taking notes like I was seriously considering everything they were saying. When they finished their presentation, I thanked them for coming and told them I appreciated them taking the time to explain everything so thoroughly. Then I slid my folder across the table. The HOA president opened it up, expecting to see a check or maybe a removal contract. Instead, what she found was a copy of the original county land survey from 1974, clearly showing the boundaries of my property and the road access easement that connected me to the main road. I pointed to the red line that marked the edge of their development. Then I pointed to the blue square that outlined my 3-acre parcel. I explained how my land was unincorporated county property that had been in my family since before their development existed. I showed them the deed with my grandfather's name on it and the county tax records going back 30 years. The lawyer started studying the documents while his face got progressively paler. The HOA president kept insisting that everyone in the area was subject to their authority, but you could tell she was starting to realize they might have made a mistake. Then I pulled out the second set of documents from my folder. These were copies of all the violation notices they'd sent me, along with a log of every time they'd trespassed on my property to take pictures. I'd also included a bill for consulting fees at $250 per hour for all the time I'd wasted dealing with their harassment. I explained that I'd never signed their CC&Rs because I was never asked to. My property wasn't part of their development and never had been. They had no legal authority to issue fines against me or threaten my property in any way. What they had been doing for the past month constituted harassment and trespassing, and I was prepared to file both civil and criminal complaints if this didn't stop immediately. The room got very quiet. The lawyer was still studying my documents and making notes. Finally, he looked up and told the HOA president they needed to speak privately outside. While they were gone, the other 2 board members just sat there looking uncomfortable. One of them mumbled something about how they were just following orders from the president and the lawyer. The other one asked if I was really going to sue them over this. I told them that depended entirely on how reasonable everyone wanted to be going forward. When the lawyer and HOA president came back inside, their whole attitude had changed. The lawyer explained that after reviewing my documentation, it was clear that my property was indeed outside their jurisdiction. He said they would be withdrawing all violation notices and fine assessments immediately. The HOA president looked like she'd been hit by a truck. She started trying to explain how this was all just an honest mistake and how their property management company must have given them incorrect information about the boundaries. She said she hoped we could put this whole misunderstanding behind us and be good neighbors going forward. I told them that was fine, but I still expected compensation for my time and legal research. I also wanted a written guarantee that no one from their organization would set foot on my property again without permission. The lawyer said they would need to discuss it with their insurance company, but he thought they could work something out. He also promised to send me a formal letter within 48 hours confirming that my property was not subject to their HOA rules and that all previous notices were being withdrawn. Before they left, I made sure to mention that I was considering expanding my solar installation in the near future. I said I was thinking about adding a few more panels and maybe a small wind turbine to supplement the solar power during winter months. I wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any more misunderstandings about my right to make improvements to my own property. The HOA president practically ran back to her car. The lawyer lingered for a minute to shake my hand and apologize again for the confusion. He seemed like a decent enough guy who'd just gotten bad information from his client. True to their word, I received a formal letter 2 days later confirming everything the lawyer had promised. They also included a check for $1,500 to cover my consulting time and legal research. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was enough to make the whole ordeal feel worthwhile. I used that money to upgrade my battery system like I'd been planning to do anyway. Now I have enough storage capacity to run my entire house for almost a week without any solar input at all. I also added 2 more panels to the array just because I could. The best part of this whole situation is that the HOA president has to drive past my house every time she leaves or enters the development. There's only one road in and out, and it goes right by my solar installation. Every time I see her car go by, I wave from my front porch while I'm checking the power output on my monitoring app. Last week, I got a visit from one of the other residents in the development. He said he'd heard about what happened with the HOA and wanted to know how I'd managed to get solar panels approved. When I explained the situation, he was amazed. Apparently, he'd been trying to get permission to install solar on his roof for 2 years, but the HOA kept rejecting his applications for aesthetic reasons. I gave him copies of all the research I'd done on property rights and HOA authority. I also suggested he might want to check exactly where his property boundaries were and whether his house was actually subject to all the restrictions he thought it was. Sometimes these development companies make mistakes when they're drawing up their maps and filing their paperwork. He thanked me and said he was going to have a surveyor come out and check his property lines. A few days later, I saw a survey crew working in his yard. I'm curious to see what they find. The whole experience taught me a few important lessons. First, never assume that someone in authority actually knows what they're talking about. The HOA president was completely confident in her position, even though she was completely wrong about the basic facts. Second, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept copies of all those violation notices and tracked every time they trespassed on my property, I wouldn't have had nearly as strong a case when it came time to demand compensation. Third, sometimes it pays to let people dig their own graves. If I'd corrected their mistake right from the beginning, they probably would have just apologized and moved on. By letting them escalate the situation and make bigger and bigger threats, I was able to turn their harassment into a payday. Most importantly, always check your maps before you check your neighbors. These people spent weeks issuing fines and making threats without ever bothering to verify that they actually had jurisdiction over my property. A 5-minute phone call to the county assessor's office would have saved everyone a lot of time and trouble. I'm still living in my grandfather's house, still generating more electricity than I can use, and still enjoying the fact that I don't have to answer to any homeowners association. My solar panels are working perfectly, my batteries are fully charged, and my property values are just fine, thank you very much. The development next door is still full of identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns and ridiculous mailboxes. The difference now is that everyone knows there's at least one property in the area where people can do whatever they want with their own land, as long as they're not breaking any actual laws. And if anyone else from that HOA ever shows up at my door with a clipboard and an attitude, well, I've still got all those legal documents filed away in a safe place. Plus, I'm thinking about adding that wind turbine I mentioned. Not because I need the extra power, but just because I can. After all, it's a free country and this is my land. The surveys and deeds prove it, and now everyone knows it. Sometimes the best revenge is just being right and making sure everyone else knows you're right. I've been thinking about putting up a small sign at the end of my driveway, something like private property, not subject to HOA rules, just to make things crystal clear for any future visitors. But then again, I think the solar panels probably send that message loud and clear all by themselves. Every morning when I check my power generation numbers and see those panels gleaming in the sunlight, I remember how satisfying it was to watch that HOA president's face when she realized she'd been barking up the wrong tree for an entire month. That memory alone is worth more than any money they paid me. The funny thing is, I probably would have been willing to work with them if they'd approached the situation differently. If they'd come to me as neighbors and politely asked if there was anything I could do to make the solar installation less visible from their properties, I might have considered adding some landscaping or adjusting the angle of the panels. But when someone shows up at your door with threats and ultimatums, demanding that you remove expensive equipment from your own property just because they don't like looking at it, well, that's a different story entirely. That's when you stand your ground and make sure they understand exactly who they're dealing with. I've heard through the grapevine that the HOA president resigned from her position a few weeks after our little meeting. Apparently, the other board members weren't too happy about having to pay legal fees and settlement money because she couldn't be bothered to check a property map before issuing violation notices. The new president seems much more reasonable. He actually stopped by last month to introduce himself and make sure there weren't any hard feelings about the whole solar panel situation. I told him I appreciated the gesture and that I hoped they'd learned something from the experience. He assured me that they've implemented new procedures for handling potential violations, including mandatory boundary checks before any notices are issued. He also mentioned that they're considering updating their bylaws to be more accommodating of renewable energy installations, since several residents have expressed interest in solar power. I wished him luck with that. Change comes slowly to organizations like homeowners associations, but maybe this whole mess will end up benefiting other people who want to make their homes more energy efficient. As for me, I'm perfectly happy with my setup the way it is. My electricity bills are zero, my carbon footprint is minimal, and my property is 100% under my own control. That's exactly the way my grandfather would have wanted it, and exactly the way it's going to stay. The next time someone tries to tell me what I can and can't do with my own land, I'll be ready for them. But hopefully word has gotten around that this particular property owner does his homework and isn't afraid to stand up for his rights. Until then, I'll just keep enjoying my energy independence and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, if you stand your ground and do your research, the little guy really can win against the bureaucrats and the bullies. And every time I see those solar panels generating free electricity from the sun, I'll remember that the best revenge is living well, especially when you're living well on your own terms, on your own land, with your own power supply. Now that's what I call a happy ending. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was working at an organization where part of my job was organizing thousands of high-quality photos of students' artworks from the main computer I worked on and transfer them to a network server. The goal was to make high-quality images accessible to other staff remotely. To do it correctly, the process was time-consuming. It involved making medium-resolution JPGs from high-res Photoshop files. That part was easy to do via batch processing. The time-consuming part was each image needed to be individually labeled with specific details about the artwork and its creator, dimensions, etc. My department manager had emphasized the importance of this task, as these labeled images were important for various organizational needs for other staff. But my new-ish supervisor, Karen, not her real name, was a major micromanager and said, "Why are you spending so much time on this project? I only want you to work on this task in the last 30 minutes of your shift." I tried to convince her it wasn't an efficient use of my time, arguing that flexibility in my workflow was necessary. I explained that on many days this task would be an ideal fill-in activity, allowing me to stay productive during otherwise slow periods. "Nope, just do it in the last 30 minutes of your shift." "Okay, you got it." Cue malicious compliance. On some days, there were literally no other productive tasks to carry on with. I could have made great progress on that task, but nope, I would sit there trying to look busy or would walk around the campus with a few sheets of paper in hand. I would try to invent ways to look productive, but sadly, in actual fact, I was doing very little at all. This went on for months when one day I had a call from the dep manager asking, "Why hasn't this project been completed yet? I've been specifically instructed by Karen not to spend any time on this task except for the last 30 minutes of my shift." Karen didn't stay with the organization for much longer after that. The next one is an entitled people story. Yeah, I'm aware of several similar stories involving entitled family members wanting houses they have no claim to, but I guess this crap really happens. And it's no picnic when it does. I suddenly became a homeowner some time ago because a friend of mine's grandfather was moving to Florida, and his house was ripe for picking. I knew the old man well. R.I.P., he passed a few months later from a sudden stroke. Anyway, he offered the house and property to me for $200K. I practically ran to the bank to apply for the loan. The house is a manufactured home from the 80s, but it was remodeled repeatedly by the former owner and has a separate garage building. The home and property could have gone for more, but he offered the house to me because he knew I'd take care of it. I had $30K saved that made a good down payment, and I was happy to leave my apartment. I'd wanted to eventually move out of there after what my cheating ex did anyway, but that's a story for another time. As for my brother, well, he went bonkers when he found out I bought a house. He had this repeated history of copycatting me for the past decade, but there was no way in hell he could copycat buying a house with his terrible credit and inconsistent income, and he got in an argument with me over how I was just trying to make him look bad by doing something he couldn't. No, I just wanted a damn house, and the price was too good to refuse. Then he told me I should have turned it down because he had no good reason. I could practically see his screws getting looser with every dumbass excuse he made as to why I shouldn't have done it. But I pointed out all those excuses were just because I did something he currently can't. And when I bought the house, it had nothing to do with him. I just wanted to be a homeowner for the security and extra space. I finally don't have to store my camper at my parents' house, and I have a garage that I can store stuff and tinker in. I bought a camping cot, he bought a camping cot, went to the gym, he went to the gym, bought good booze, he bought good booze, or stole it from me. I bought a new TV, B bought a new TV, I bought a truck, he bought a truck, I bought a camper, he bought a camper, I bought a used portable DVD player. He bought a used portable DVD player. I went camping in a specific place. He went camping in that specific place. I bought a house, he 404 error, insert tea kettle noises, and Benny Hill chase. He also acted like a complete child toward me when he built his mini-ram thing. He actually confronted me and said it was cooler than my boring Tundra because it was something original. I swear he did the dumbest mods to that vehicle, like putting twist studs in the suspension coils to raise the ride height. Well, after weeks of openly fuming about me being a homeowner, my brother suddenly acted like he had another brilliant idea. He wanted to move in with me. I laughed at him. Then he ended up demanding I rent one of my rooms to him, and for only $200 a month, utilities included, because he shouldn't have to pay any more than that since we're family. He flipped his lid when I said duck no, then he got our parents involved again. Only this time they actually sided with him at first, though it was mainly our mother. She and my brother showed up demanding I let my brother move in, and my brother had a crap-eating grin on his face that I could tell he was thinking he was getting his way thanks to Mommy Dearest. I said duck no to both their faces, and my mother cried that I was using foul language to her and being an ass when I had the space now. I called my dad, and he told my mom that he'd warned her I wouldn't do it, and to leave me the hell alone. Mom whined my brother was living out of his camper next to a shabby house he was renting space from. I said that wasn't my problem to fix. And my brother has proven countless times that he cannot be trusted. My brother was fuming to the point of being red with veins popping out. My mom tried one more time to convince me with tears, and that just made me angrier. I went on a rant that was something like this. Bro can't buy a house, so he wanted to invade mine. I refused to ever live with my brother again. I would sooner live in the woods without electricity than with him. He's intentionally irritating as all hell, and if I had him as a roommate, I just knew he'd steal my booze, take my stuff, and invade my privacy nonstop. Not ducking. Happening. No matter how many tears Mom tries using on me. My mom broke down and finally conceded she'd never convince me after that rant, and she had to take my brother by the hand and leave with him because he initially refused to go, and kept begging her to turn back and make me let him move in. And then I yelled to him that it was a laugh that he called me a mama's boy before, because he'd become exactly that. And this was just like the time he tried to get our mother to make me trade vehicles with him because he felt ashamed to be driving a minivan. He yanked away from Mom, then told me to go duck myself and the horse I rode in on. I laughed and pointed out I didn't ride in on anything because I was already home. But his rattle-can horse was waiting for him in the driveway. He flipped his lid again and looked like his head was going to explode, but Mom got in front of him and told him to just go. Then he drove off in his rattle-can Silverado without her. He'd driven her there, and then I had to take her home. While taking her home, I made things very clear with my mother over why I could never trust my brother again, and his life was not my burden to bear. And then told her how little my brother was offering for rent anyway, which he'd conveniently not told her. Then I later rented that same room to one of my best friends for $600 a month, and he pays for utilities. The other 2 rooms are my bedroom and a home office. There's an extra room in the separate garage, too. So my mother tried to make me let my brother live in the garage instead. There's enough room in its storage room for a bedroom. Again, I said duck no. And that's since been turned into another friend's rented room with a bit of a plywood remodel. Yeah, I kinda rented both the spare bedroom and garage room out to friends out of spite, but I wasn't letting my brother live with me in any capacity. My brother later ended up having a complete meltdown in front of our parents over how he's the older brother. He should be the one who owns a house first. He's supposed to be successful, and I'm supposed to be the big loser in his shadow. Our dad poked him with his cane and told him that's not how life works, and they had a big argument. They told him to get out and not come back until he's cooled off and learned that he's just being a pointlessly jealous a-hole. The next part I post, my brother did the dumbest thing of all. Edit. I came home late to over 600 comments and still more pouring in. Far too many for me to answer. So I'll clear some things up here. Yes, I am no contact with my brother, and he's NC with the rest of the family as well. I do have cameras inside and outside my home, and a dash cam too. My brother knows this, and has stayed the duck away since he left town. I'm told I'm an a-hole too, not arguing that because it's true. I'm not exactly the nicest guy, but have someone like my brother in your life and see how peachy you turn out. Some have mentioned having siblings just like my brother. Sadly, I know very well people like him are increasingly common these days. My dad said a number of times that my brother probably would have ended up dead in an alley if he lived here 50 years ago with the way he behaves. As for our ages, I'm 30 and my brother is 32. I have not given my parents a spare key to my house. One is with a friend, and another is very cleverly hidden. My house is a manufactured home, but it's not in a trailer park and has been significantly modified with new siding and a new roof and has a separate garage building. The previous owner was a former general contractor, and he loved to build and repair. And yes, I do have good insurance. I keep seeing comments about a clock radio. Pardon me for not getting the reference, but I do own a digital alarm clock that has a built-in CD player. Currently plays Tina Turner's Proud Mary to wake me up. My brother and I were raised pretty evenly. He was always a jerk, but went full a-hole after moving out. But our mother didn't favor him. She chewed him out plenty, and she didn't normally side with his stupidity. She just wanted him to live in a better place than in a camper next to a house filled with potheads. Addition, my brother willingly moved into that camper. He was renting half a room in that house of potheads, then convinced the landlord to let him live in his camper on the property for the same price instead, and he bragged about his camper a lot, which he has a full gaming center in, complete with PlayStation. He only wanted to invade my house to piss me off and make his cost of living even lower. He also doesn't like camping nearly as much as me. He mainly liked just pissing me off by following me. He loved to make me miserable. In fact, he felt entitled to make me miserable. That's the kind of person he is. Do I have a restraining order against my brother? Not really. Just didn't bother. Because even if I did, it'd only be for like a year, and my brother wouldn't let something like that stop him if he was truly determined anyway. Anyway, thank you for watching.